A rifle shot split the morning air as Clara Campbell slumped against the cracked wooden post of her small homestead, clutching her 5-year-old daughter Emily to her chest. The letter in her hand fluttered in the hot Arizona breeze, its cruel words cutting deeper than any knife. Her husband Richard was dead, killed during a mining accident in the mountains. The year was 1875, and Clara was alone with a child in 20 acres of unforgiving land outside Loveland, Arizona territory. "We have to be strong now," Clara whispered into her daughter's dark curls, though her own voice shook with uncertainty. "Just you and me against the world." The funeral had been small, just Clara, Emily, and a handful of townsfolk who barely knew Richard. Most came out of obligation rather than grief. As people filtered away, Clara overheard whispers that weren't meant for her ears. "Poor woman," one older lady said. "No one wants a woman with a child in these parts. Too much burden." Clara squared her shoulders and pretended not to hear, but the words burrowed deep into her heart like desert scorpions seeking shelter. Emily's small hand in hers was both comfort and reminder of her impossible situation. The homestead Richard had built sat 10 miles outside of Loveland, a modest but growing settlement that served as a stop along the stagecoach line. Their plot of land had a small 2-room cabin, a struggling garden, and a handful of chickens that somehow survived the predators and harsh climate. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. 3 weeks after the funeral, Clara stood in the doorway watching Emily chase a butterfly, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Their food stores were dwindling faster than expected. The garden was withering in the relentless summer heat, and Clara's attempts at hunting had proved disastrous. She was a schoolteacher from Boston, not a frontier woman. "Mama, look," Emily called, her small face lighting up as she pointed to the horizon. "Someone's coming." Clara shaded her eyes against the sun and spotted a rider approaching through the heat haze. Visitors were rare, and strangers even rarer. She quickly ushered Emily behind her, one hand on the shotgun Richard had insisted she learn to use. The rider approached slowly, deliberately, clearly not wanting to appear threatening. As he drew closer, Clara could make out a tall man with broad shoulders atop a chestnut mare. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features until he was nearly at her fence line. "Afternoon, madam," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair was tied back at his neck, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jaw. "Name's Colton Thornton. I'm looking for work. Heard in town you might need some help with this place." Clara stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Storekeeper, Mr. Jenkins, said your husband passed recently." He glanced down, a gesture of respect. "My condolences, madam. I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Thornton, but I'm afraid I can't afford to hire help." The man Colton nodded thoughtfully. "Understood. But perhaps we could come to an arrangement. I need a place to stay while I'm passing through. Could work for room and board if you've got a barn or someplace I could bed down." Clara hesitated. Having a strange man on her property went against every sensible instinct, but the roof needed patching before the summer storms hit, and the well was starting to run dry. Tasks Richard had planned to complete before his accident. "Mama," Emily whispered loudly, peeking around Clara's skirts. "He has a pretty horse." Colton smiled at the child, his face softening. "That's Penny. She thinks she's pretty too, which is why she's so spoiled." Emily giggled, and Clara felt her resolve wavering. "Where are you headed, Mr. Thornton?" "California, eventually, but no particular hurry." His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "I give you my word, Mrs. Campbell, I'm just a man looking for honest work, but I understand if you'd rather I move on." Something in his voice, perhaps the lack of pity or condescension she'd grown accustomed to, made Clara straighten her shoulders. 3 days, she said firmly. "You can stay 3 days and help with the most pressing repairs. The barn has a clean stall. You'll take your meals with us, but I expect you gone by sunrise on the 4th day." Colton nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Yes, madam, that's more than fair." That evening, after Clara had put Emily to bed, she sat at her small kitchen table watching Colton clean his plate of the simple stew she'd prepared. He ate, with the focused appreciation of a man accustomed to trail cooking. "This is mighty fine, Mrs. Campbell," he said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal." "It's nothing special," Clara replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "And please call me Clara. Mrs. Campbell makes me feel like my mother-in-law." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Clara then, and I'm Colton, or Colt to most." "Where are you from, Colton?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "Texas, originally. Family had a small ranch there." His eyes clouded briefly, "Lost it after the war." "Been moving around since then, taking work where I can find it." "You fought in the war," he nodded, but didn't elaborate. "Your husband was a miner, among other things," Clara said, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. "Richard came west for the Silver Rush. Found me instead while passing through Boston. Said I was worth more than any silver vein." She smiled faintly at the memory. "I was teaching at a girls' school. Thought I was destined to be a spinster until he swept me off my feet with stories of adventure and fortune in the West. And then Emily came along. Yes, born right here in this cabin with only a neighbor woman to help." Clara looked toward the small bedroom where her daughter slept. "Richard was disappointed it wasn't a son, but he tried to be a good father." Colton seemed to consider this. "Emily seems like a fine child, bright-eyed, curious, too curious sometimes," Clara admitted. "She gets that from me." The conversation lulled, and Clara found herself studying the man across from her. Despite his weathered appearance, there was something gentle about him. His hands were calloused from work, but they handled his utensils with surprising grace. He caught her looking and smiled, causing Clara to flush and stand abruptly. "It's getting late. I should clean up." "Let me help," Colton offered, rising as well. "Least I can do for a good meal." Before she could protest, he was gathering plates and moving to the wash basin. They worked in companionable silence, and Clara realized it was the first time since Richard's death that she didn't feel entirely alone. True to his word, Colton began work at dawn. Clara woke to the rhythmic sound of hammering and found him already on the roof, patching holes with materials he'd found in Richard's tool shed. Emily sat on a stump below, chattering up at him as she played with a small wooden horse he must have carved for her. "Mama." Emily called when she spotted Clara. "Mr. Colt is fixing our house so the rain won't get in." "I can see that," Clara replied, shading her eyes to look up at him. "You're an early riser, Mr. Thornton. Daylight's valuable out here," he called down, securing another shingle. "And I figured the little miss might want to help me check the chicken coop after this. Saw some coyote tracks nearby." Clara nodded her appreciation. Richard had always said the roof needed work, but there had always been something more urgent demanding his attention at the mines. She wondered briefly if Colton was simply being kind and taking on the task, or if the situation had truly been as dire as he made it seem. The day passed in a blur of activity. After fixing the roof, Colton reinforced the chicken coop, dug out the well to improve water flow, and even managed to repair the broken wheel on their cart. Emily followed him like a shadow, handing him tools and peppering him with questions that he answered with patient good humor. Clara watched them from the garden as she tried to salvage what vegetables hadn't succumbed to the heat. There was something about the way Colton spoke to Emily, not with the condescending tone adults often used with children, but with genuine interest and respect that warmed her heart. By supper time, Clara found herself wondering if 3 days would be enough. The homestead had so many needs, and Colton seemed to anticipate each one without being asked. As they sat down to another simple meal, she gathered her courage. "The work you've done today. It would have taken me weeks if I could have managed it at all." Colton nodded modestly. "Happy to help." "I was thinking," Clara continued, focusing on cutting Emily's food to avoid his gaze, "perhaps you could stay a bit longer. A week, maybe. I can't pay you, but with the repairs and hunting, we'd eat better than we have in a month." He seemed to consider this, taking a slow sip of water. "Are you sure that's wise? People talk, Clara. A single woman with a strange man staying on her property." "People already talk," she replied, more sharply than intended. "They've been talking since the day Richard brought me to town, too educated for my own good, according to Mrs. Prescott at the general store." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I can believe that." You don't speak like most folks around here. Is that a compliment or an observation? Both, maybe. His eyes held hers for a moment. I'd be happy to stay a week if you're certain, Clara nodded, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. I am. Emily needs a safe home, and I can't provide that without help right now. Then it's settled, Colton said, returning his attention to his meal. 1 week. 1 week stretched into 2 as summer blazed across the Arizona landscape. Colton proved himself invaluable hunting game, making repairs Clara hadn't even known were needed, and teaching Emily small tasks suited to her age. The child blossomed under his attention, proudly collecting eggs and helping to water the garden that was showing signs of recovery under Colton's care. Clara found herself looking forward to evenings when the three of them would sit on the porch watching the spectacular sunsets. Sometimes Colton would tell stories of his travels, carefully edited for Emily's ears. Other times, they'd simply sit in comfortable silence, the weight of the day's work settling into tired muscles. It was during one such evening, with Emily already asleep inside, that Clara finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why did you really stop here, Colton? Loveland isn't exactly on the main route to California. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. I knew your husband, he said softly. Not well, but we worked a claim together for a few months last year, up near Prescott. He talked about you and Emily all the time, showed everyone your tintype. When I heard in Tucson about the accident, I thought I'd pass through, see if you needed anything. Didn't plan to stay, just check. Clara's throat tightened. Why didn't you say so before? Didn't want you to feel obligated or suspicious. Plenty of men might use a connection like that for their own gain. He glanced at her. Richard was proud of you, said you were the smartest woman he'd ever met. Unexpected tears sprang to Clara's eyes. He never told me that. Men aren't always good at saying the important things. Colton's voice was gentle, but he meant it. Clara wiped her eyes quickly. Thank you for telling me and for stopping by. I don't know what we would have done without your help these past weeks. You'd have managed, he said confidently. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of mutual respect that had grown into something more complicated. Clara looked away first, rising from her chair. It's getting late, we should turn in. Colton nodded, but remained seated. I'll sit a while longer if you don't mind. Keep an eye out. As Clara lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking not of Richard, but of Colton, his quiet strength, his kindness toward Emily, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The realization that she was attracted to him hit her with surprising force, followed immediately by guilt. Richard had been dead barely 2 months, yet even as she chastised herself, Clara knew her feelings weren't just physical attraction. Colton represented something she'd never fully had with Richard's partnership. Her husband had been charismatic and ambitious, but ultimately restless, more committed to finding his fortune than building a life with her. Colton, by contrast, seemed to understand the value of small daily acts that made a home. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was hanging laundry while Colton chopped firewood, and Emily helped by stacking the smaller pieces, when the sound of an approaching buggy drew their attention. It's Reverend Porter, Clara said, recognizing the Presbyterian minister who had presided over Richard's funeral. Her hands automatically went to her hair, tucking loose strands back into her simple bun. Colton put down his axe, nodding to the clergyman as he pulled his horse to a stop. Morning, Reverend. The older man's eyebrows rose slightly at Colton's familiar greeting. Good morning, Mrs. Campbell, I trust you're well as can be expected, Clara replied, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. What brings you all the way out here? Reverend Porter cleared his throat. I was concerned when I heard you had a guest staying at your property. As your spiritual advisor, I felt compelled to check on your welfare. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mr. Thornton is helping with repairs in exchange for room and board, nothing more. I see. The Reverend's tone suggested he saw rather more than Clara wanted him to. Nevertheless, appearances matter, Mrs. Campbell. A widow alone with a man not related by blood or marriage invites speculation. Before Clara could respond, Colton stepped forward. With all due respect, Reverend Mrs. Campbell's reputation shouldn't suffer because she's practical enough to accept help. The Bible's full of stories about helping widows and orphans, isn't it? Indeed, Mr. Thornton, Colton Thornton. Indeed, Mr. Thornton. But those stories rarely involve unmarried men living on a widow's property. The Reverend turned back to Clara. The ladies of the Church Aid Society have discussed your situation. They're prepared to help find a more suitable arrangement for you and your daughter in town. Perhaps rooms above the millinery where you might find proper employment. Clara stiffened. This is my home, Reverend. Richard and I built it together. I have no intention of abandoning it. Mrs. Campbell, please be reasonable. A woman alone cannot maintain a homestead, especially with a young child to care for. The land will revert to the territory if you cannot meet the improvement requirements. She's not alone, Colton interjected, and the improvements are well underway. The Reverend regarded him with thinly veiled disapproval. And how long do you intend to stay, Mr. Thornton? Until winter. Until the gossip becomes so intolerable that Mrs. Campbell's reputation is beyond repair. A tense silence fell. Emily, sensing the adult's discomfort, pressed against Clara's skirts. I think you should leave now, Reverend, Clara said quietly. I appreciate your concern, but my arrangements are my own business. The clergyman sighed heavily. Very well, but consider what I've said, Mrs. Campbell. For your daughter's sake, if not your own. With a final pointed look at Colton, he turned his buggy and departed. Clara stood rigid until the buggy disappeared from sight, then turned and strode toward the house without a word. Colton knelt to Emily's level, suggesting she check on the chickens before following Clara inside. He found her at the kitchen table, hands clenched into fists. He's right, she said without looking up. People are talking. I should have known they would. Let them talk, Colton replied, keeping his distance. You're doing what you need to survive. Am I? Clara finally raised her eyes to his. Or am I being selfish? Maybe Emily would be better off in town where she could go to school, have friends. Is that what you want? To give up this place? No, she admitted. But what I want and what's best aren't always the same thing. Colton considered this. What if there was another option, such as, he hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. I could stay on longer, through harvest at least. As a hired hand, properly documented with a contract, that might quiet some of the gossip. We still couldn't pay you. I could take a percentage of whatever we bring in from the garden and hunting, and in the meantime, you'd have helped maintaining the homestead claim. Clara studied him. Why would you do that? California's still waiting. California's been there a long time. It'll keep. He smiled slightly. Truth is, I've grown fond of this place and Emily. His eyes held hers. And I respect what you're trying to do here. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. You'd really stay, through harvest, if you'll have me. Something in his tone made her breath catch. I'll draw up a contract tomorrow, for appearance's sake. For appearances, he agreed, though something in his eyes suggested there might be more to it than that. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Colton continued to make improvements to the homestead while Clara tended the now thriving garden and preserved food for winter. Emily divided her time between them, soaking up knowledge from both with the sponge-like capacity of childhood. Clara found herself laughing more, worrying less. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders since Richard's death hadn't disappeared, but it had lightened considerably. Each evening, after Emily was asleep, she and Colton would sit together, planning the next day's work or simply talking. She learned about his family in Texas, his time in the Confederate cavalry during the war, and his wanderings since then. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her education at a women's seminary, and her brief teaching career. Why did you give it up? He asked one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. Teaching, I mean, Clara smiled ruefully. I didn't intend to, not permanently. When Richard and I married, I thought I'd teach here. But there was no school in Loveland then, and by the time they built one, I was expecting Emily. Then Richard said it wasn't fitting for his wife to work outside the home. Do you miss it, teaching, every day? She looked toward the darkened window where Emily slept. I teach Emily, of course, but it's not the same as having a classroom full of minds to shape. Colton was quiet for a moment. The town's growing. They might need another teacher soon. Perhaps, Clara acknowledged, though they both knew a widowed woman with a reputation for housing an unmarried man would hardly be the school board's first choice. As August gave way to September, rumors reached them that a new silver strike had been made in the mountains north of town. Loveland buzzed with activity as prospectors, and those hoping to profit from them poured in. Towns changed, Colton reported after returning from selling excess vegetables and eggs. 2 new saloons opened, and they're putting up a hotel. Talk of a proper bank, too. Clara nodded, counting the coins he'd brought back. Did you see the Reverend while you were there? Briefly. He asked how long I intended to stay on, and what did you tell him? Colton met her gaze steadily. That I'd stay as long as I was needed. The air between them thickened with unspoken feelings. Clara had become increasingly aware of Colton as a man, the strength in his hands as he worked, the way his shirt clung to his back when damp with sweat, the timbre of his voice in the quiet evenings. She suspected he felt a similar attraction, though he'd been scrupulously respectful, never crossing the boundaries of propriety. Harvest will be soon, she said, breaking the moment. You'll have earned your percentage. Yes, he agreed, but there's winter preparations after that. Clara smiled despite herself. There always seems to be something more that needs doing. That's the nature of a homestead, he replied, a warmth in his eyes that made her look away. Their comfortable routine was disrupted a week later when Emily fell ill. What began as a simple cough quickly developed into a burning fever that left the child listless and struggling for breath. Clara recognized the symptoms with dread. Pneumonia had claimed her own sister when they were children. We need to get her to a doctor, Clara said, her voice tight with fear as she bathed Emily's forehead with cool water. Colton nodded grimly. I'll hitch the wagon. Town's 3 hours if we push hard. The journey was agonizing. Every bump in the rough road caused Emily to moan weakly, and her breathing grew more labored as they traveled. Clara held her daughter close, whispering prayers and reassurances, while Colton pushed the horses faster than was safe on the mountain trails. Loveland's doctor, a gruff older man named Harmon, met them at his small office near the edge of town. He examined Emily with practiced efficiency before administering a mixture of herbs and medicine that eased her breathing slightly. She's a sick little girl, he told Clara bluntly. Needs constant care for the next few days. I'd keep her here, but with the influx of miners, I've got my hands full with injuries. I'll care for her, Clara said firmly. Just tell me what to do. Problem is, she needs to stay in town, Dr. Harmon replied. I need to check on her regularly, and that mountain trail's too rough to be going back and forth. You got somewhere to stay? Clara hesitated. No, but surely there's a room we could rent. Not likely. Town's full to bursting with the new strike. She can stay with me, a female voice said from the doorway. Clara turned to find a well-dressed woman of middle age standing in the doorway. Her face was kind but careworn, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Thornton, the doctor acknowledged with a nod. You know Mrs. Campbell? Not personally, the woman replied, stepping into the room. But I know of her. I'm Catherine Thornton, Mrs. Campbell. I run the boarding house on Maple Street. Clara glanced at Colton in confusion, noting the shock on his face. Thornton, are you? Colton's mother, Catherine confirmed, her eyes fixed on her son with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Though I haven't seen him in nearly 10 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Colton stood frozen, his face pale beneath his tan. Mother, he finally managed. What are you doing in Loveland? I might ask you the same, she replied, though without rancor. But that's a conversation for another time. Right now this child needs care and I have a room. She turned to Clara. No charge, Mrs. Campbell. I couldn't call myself a Christian woman and turn away a sick child. Clara looked between mother and son, aware that she was witnessing a reunion laden with unspoken history. But Emily's ragged breathing left no room for hesitation. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I accept your kind offer. Catherine nodded briskly. Good. Doctor, what instructions do you have for us? As Dr. Harmon detailed Emily's care, Clara watched Colton from the corner of her eye. He seemed to have recovered from his initial shock, but a muscle twitched in his jaw and his eyes never left his mother's face. The boarding house was a handsome two-story building with a wide porch and freshly painted shutters. Inside, it was immaculately clean, with modest but comfortable furnishings. Catherine led them to a small room on the first floor, where she efficiently prepared a bed for Emily. "This was my private sitting room," she explained as she turned down the covers. "But it will serve better as a sick room. The doctor can come in directly without disturbing other guests." "It's very kind of you," Clara said, laying Emily gently on the bed. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Catherine replied. "I'll have some broth sent in shortly. The child needs fluids." She paused at the door, finally looking directly at her son. "Colton, I expect you'll want to see to the horses and wagon. There's a stable behind the building. We can talk later." He nodded stiffly. "Yes, madam." When Catherine had gone, Clara turned to Colton. "You never mentioned your mother lived in Loveland." "I didn't know," he said, his voice low. "Last I heard, she was still in Texas after my father died. He shook his head. "It's complicated." Clara laid a hand on his arm. "You don't have to explain now, but you should talk to her." "I will," he promised, glancing at Emily. "But right now, your daughter needs you. I'll see to the horses and find out what's happened in town since we were last here." True to her word, Catherine returned with broth and medicine, helping Clara coax them into Emily. The older woman was brisk but gentle, her hands sure as she checked the child's fever. "You have a beautiful daughter," she commented as Emily finally drifted into a fitful sleep. "She has your chin, but those eyes." "Her father's," Clara finished. "Richard had the same blue eyes." Catherine nodded. "Colton told you he knew your husband." "Yes, they worked a claim together for a time." "I see." Something in Catherine's tone suggested she saw more than she was saying. "It was good of him to help you after Richard's passing." "He's been." Clara hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't reveal too much of her feelings. "Indispensable. The homestead would have failed without him." "My son has always had a strong sense of duty," Catherine said, arranging Emily's blankets. "Even as a boy." Clara studied the older woman's profile, noting the same strong jawline Colton possessed. "How long have you been in Loveland, Mrs. Thornton?" 3 years. "After my husband died, I sold what was left of our land in Texas and came west. The boarding house was a business opportunity, but also," she smiled faintly, "I thought perhaps I might hear news of Colton. The West isn't so vast that men don't cross paths eventually." "Yet you seem surprised to see him." "Surprised, yes, but not unhappy." Catherine's eyes met Clara's. "There was a disagreement before he left, words said on both sides that should have remained unspoken. Pride can be a terrible barrier to reconciliation, Mrs. Campbell. Please call me Clara." "Clara, then, and I'm Catherine." The older woman hesitated. "May I speak plainly?" "Of course. People talk in a town this size. I've heard about your arrangement with my son. I want you to know I don't judge you for it. Survival on the frontier requires practical solutions, not adherence to drawing room propriety." Clara felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected ally. "Thank you. Not everyone has been so understanding." "No, I imagine not." Catherine rose, smoothing her skirts. "I'll sit with Emily while you rest. There's a washroom down the hall if you'd like to freshen up." The next few days passed in a blur of worry and exhaustion as Emily battled the infection. Clara rarely left her daughter's side, while Catherine managed the boarding house and brought meals and fresh linens. Colton divided his time between helping at the boarding house and returning to the homestead to tend to the animals and garden. On the third night, Emily's fever broke. Clara wept with relief as her daughter opened her eyes, weak but lucid for the first time in days. "Mama," Emily whispered, "I'm thirsty." "Here, sweetheart," Clara helped her sip water. "How do you feel?" "Tired. Where are we?" "At Mrs. Thornton's boarding house in town. You've been very sick." Emily's brow furrowed. "Mrs. Thornton, is she Mr. Colt's mama?" "Yes, she is, and she's been taking very good care of you." Clara smoothed Emily's damp hair from her forehead. "Dr. Harmon says you need to rest and get your strength back. When can we go home?" "Soon, darling." "As soon as you're strong enough." Emily nodded, her eyelids already drooping. "Is Mr. Colt still going to stay with us when we go home?" The question caught Clara off guard. I'm not sure, sweetheart. We'll have to see." But as Emily drifted back to sleep, Clara found herself wondering the same thing. The arrangement they'd made had been practical, born of necessity. Yet somewhere along the line, it had become more than that. She'd begun to think of Colton not as a temporary helper, but as a permanent part of their lives. The door opened softly, and Colton himself entered, carrying a tray with tea and bread. "Mother said Emily woke up," he whispered, setting the tray down. "How is she?" "Better," Clara smiled, wiping away tears. "The fever's broken, she's going to be all right." Relief washed over his face. "Thank God, I was worried. I know, so was I." She reached for his hand without thinking. "Thank you for getting us here so quickly." The doctor said it made all the difference. His fingers tightened around hers. "You don't need to thank me for that. I care about her too, you know." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Clara was acutely aware of his nearness, of the warmth of his hand around hers. The moment was broken by Catherine's arrival. "I thought I heard voices," she said, taking in their clasped hands with a raised eyebrow before they quickly separated. "How's our patient?" "Improving," Clara replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. She woke up asking for water. "That's a good sign. The doctor will be pleased." Catherine moved to check Emily's temperature with the back of her hand. "Still warm, but nothing like before. I think the worst has passed." As his mother tended to Emily, Colton motioned for Clara to join him in the hallway. "I've been thinking," he said once they were alone. "With Emily on the mend, I should get back to the homestead full time. The garden needs harvesting, and there's winter preparations to be made." "Of course," Clara nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that flared in her chest. "You've already stayed in town longer than needed. I'm sure you're anxious to get back to work." "That's not." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I'm not trying to leave you, Clara, but someone needs to tend things, and you need to be here with Emily." "I understand," she assured him, though part of her wondered if he was using the homestead as an excuse to put distance between them and between himself and his mother. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow morning, if you think you'll be all right here. Your mother has been incredibly kind. I'm sure we'll manage fine." He studied her face. "You like her?" "I do. She's a remarkable woman." Clara hesitated. "Colton, have you spoken with her about whatever happened between you?" He looked away. "Not yet. There hasn't been time with Emily so sick." "There's time now," she said gently. "Emily's sleeping peacefully and I could use some fresh air. Why don't you talk to your mother while I take a short walk?" Colton looked as if he might protest, but finally nodded. "Maybe you're right. It's been a long time coming." Clara squeezed his arm reassuringly before slipping past him toward the front door. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, a welcome relief after the stuffiness of the sick room. She walked slowly down the main street, noting the changes since her last visit to town. New buildings were going up, and the streets were busy despite the late hour. "Mrs. Campbell," Clara turned to see Reverend Porter approaching, his expression a mixture of concern and censure. "Good evening, Reverend. I heard your daughter was ill. How is the child?" "Improving, thank God. Dr. Harmon has been wonderful, and Mrs. Thornton has kindly taken us in." "Catherine Thornton is a pillar of our community," he acknowledged. "Though I was surprised to learn of her connection to your boarder." Clara stiffened. "Mr. Thornton has been a godsend to Emily and me. I won't apologize for accepting his help." "No one is asking you to apologize, Mrs. Campbell. But surely you can see how his continued presence on your property might be misinterpreted, especially now that we know his own mother lives right here in town." "What exactly are you suggesting, Reverend?" he sighed heavily. "Only that there are proper ways to conduct oneself, even on the frontier. If Mr. Thornton's intentions are honorable, he should declare them openly. If not, then perhaps it would be best if he moved on." Clara felt her temper rising. "My arrangements are my business, not the town's. Nor, with all due respect, are they the church's." "You're wrong there, Mrs. Campbell. When a woman's reputation is at stake, it becomes the concern of all who care about moral standards. Think of your daughter. What example are you setting?" "An example of survival," Clara replied, her voice tight. "Of doing what needs to be done in difficult circumstances. That seems a worthy lesson to me." Before the minister could respond, Clara turned and walked swiftly back toward the boarding house, her cheeks burning with indignation. She knew his concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Society's rules existed for a reason, and she'd been bending them for months. But the alternative had been failure, perhaps even starvation. When she returned to the boarding house, she found Colton alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. His expression was thoughtful rather than troubled. "Did you speak with your mother?" Clara asked, taking a seat across from him. He nodded. "We cleared the air. It was long overdue. I'm glad. She told me why she left Texas," he continued. "After father died, the land was heavily mortgaged. She could have lost everything to the bank. Instead, she sold what she could and came west to start fresh." He smiled faintly. "She's done well for herself." "She's a strong woman," Clara agreed. "Like someone else I know." Colton's eyes met hers. "Clara, there's something I need to say. I've been putting it off, telling myself the timing wasn't right, but—" "Mrs. Campbell," Catherine's voice interrupted from the doorway. "Emily's asking for you." Clara rose immediately. "Is she all right?" "Just wanting her mother. She's still a bit feverish and confused." With an apologetic glance at Colton, Clara hurried to Emily's room. Her daughter was restless, calling out in her sleep. Clara sat beside her, humming softly and stroking her hair until she settled. Catherine joined her a short while later. "She's looking better already," she observed, laying a cool cloth on Emily's forehead. "Children are remarkably resilient." "Yes, they are," Clara agreed, thinking of all the changes Emily had weathered in her short life. "I only hope I'm doing right by her." Catherine studied her for a moment. "May I speak plainly again?" "Please do. My son cares for you, both of you. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Clara felt her heart quicken. "Mrs. Thornton, Catherine, please, and let me finish." The older woman sat down, her expression earnest. "I'm not blind to the situation you've been in. A widow alone, trying to maintain a homestead claim with a young child. It's an impossible task without help, but what began as a practical arrangement has clearly become something more." "I care for your son as well," Clara admitted quietly. "But it's complicated." "Life usually is," Catherine replied with a smile, "but sometimes the most complicated situations have the simplest solutions. If you and Colton care for each other, why not make it official? Marriage would silence the gossips and secure your homestead claim." Clara stared at her in surprise. "You're suggesting we marry? Is that so shocking? You're both unattached, both fond of each other and of Emily. You work well together from what I've observed. Many successful marriages have been built on less. But what about love?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Catherine's expression softened. "Do you love my son, Clara?" The directness of the question took her breath away. Did she love Colton? The man who had appeared when she needed him most, who had worked alongside her without complaint, who treated her daughter with gentle affection and respect, who made her laugh, who listened when she spoke, who saw her as a partner rather than a possession. "I think I do," she whispered, the realization dawning even as she spoke the words. "But I'm not sure if he does," Catherine interrupted confidently. "A mother knows these things, but Colton has always been cautious with his heart. After the war he changed, became more guarded. It might take some encouragement for him to speak his mind." Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. "This is all happening so fast." "Is it? You've lived and worked together for months. You know each other's habits, strengths, weaknesses. That's more than most couples have when they wed." Catherine rose, patting Clara's shoulder. "Just something to consider. Now I'll watch Emily while you get some rest. You look exhausted." After Catherine left, Clara sat in the dim room watching Emily sleep peacefully. Marriage. The idea both terrified and exhilarated her. Her marriage to Richard had been born of passion and dreams, a whirlwind romance that swept her away from everything familiar. In many ways, they'd remained strangers even after years together, each pursuing separate visions of what their life should be. With Colton, it would be different. They'd already faced hardship together, already built something real on her small homestead. There would be no illusions, no false promises of easy fortune, just the daily work of living shared between two people who respected each other. But what if Catherine was wrong? What if Colton's kindness was just that kindness, not love? The humiliation of offering her heart only to have it gently declined would be unbearable. Emily stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and Clara stroked her hair soothingly. Whatever her feelings for Colton, her daughter had to come first. Emily had already lost one father. Clara couldn't risk attaching her to another man who might leave. Mourning brought no clarity, but it did bring improvement in Emily's condition. The child sat up and managed to eat a small breakfast, her eyes brighter than they had been in days. Dr. Harmon pronounced her on the mend, but advised at least another week in town before attempting the journey home. Colton prepared to leave as planned, loading supplies into the wagon. "I should be able to get most of the harvest in," he told Clara as they stood in the boarding house yard. "Though it would go faster with help. As soon as Emily's strong enough, we'll come home," she promised. "Try not to work yourself too hard," he smiled. "I'll be careful, and I'll come back to check on you both in a few days." Clara nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. Their conversation from the previous night hung unfinished between them. "Colton, about what you were going to say last night. It can wait," he said quickly. "Until you're back home and Emily's fully recovered, some things shouldn't be rushed." Despite his reassurance, Clara felt a pang of disappointment. "Safe travels," she said instead, stepping back as he climbed onto the wagon seat. As Colton drove away, Catherine joined her in the yard. "He'll be back," she said confidently. "My son may be stubborn, but he's not foolish enough to let you slip away." "I hope you're right," Clara replied, watching until the wagon disappeared around a bend. The next week passed slowly. Emily grew stronger each day, though she tired easily and complained of boredom. Clara read to her from books Catherine provided and took her for short walks as she regained her strength. The activity in town fascinated Emily, who had rarely seen so many people and buildings. On one such walk, they encountered Mrs. Prescott from the general store, who stopped them with a calculating smile. "Mrs. Campbell, how good to see you in town, and little Emily too, looking much improved." "Thank you, Mrs. Prescott. We've been fortunate to have excellent care, so I've heard. Staying with Mrs. Thornton, aren't you?" "Such a coincidence that her son has been working your land." The woman's tone made the observation sound like an accusation. Clara lifted her chin. "Not a coincidence at all. Mrs. Thornton is a kind Christian woman who offered help when we needed it most." Of course, Mrs. Prescott patted Emily's head with a gloved hand. "And will Mr. Thornton be continuing his assistance?" Now that his mother has been found, before Clara could respond, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Colton approaching, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of Emily up and about. "Look at you, little miss," he said, crouching to Emily's level. Standing tall as a pine tree, Emily giggled. "Mr. Colt, did you come to take us home?" "Not just yet," he replied, glancing up at Clara. "Dr. Harmon says a few more days of rest first, but soon." Mrs. Prescott observed this exchange with barely disguised interest. "Mr. Thornton, how good of you to check on your employer's welfare." Colton straightened, his expression cooling as he took in the older woman. "Mrs. Prescott, Emily isn't just my employer's daughter. She's a child I've grown fond of. Where I come from, looking out for children is what decent folks do." The storekeeper had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. I meant no offense. Well, I must be getting back to the store. Good day to you all." She hurried away, no doubt eager to report on the encounter to her gossip circle. Clara sighed. "I'm sorry about that. The whole town seems to be watching us." "Let them watch," Colton replied, his eyes still on Mrs. Prescott's retreating form. "People with empty lives fill them with talk about others." Emily tugged at his hand. "Did you bring Penny? Can I see her?" "She's at the livery stable," he told her. "Maybe your mama will let us visit her if you're feeling strong enough." Clara nodded. "A short visit, but then you need to rest, young lady." As they walked toward the livery, Colton brought Clara up to date on the homestead. "Garden's doing well. I've harvested most of the vegetables and stored what I could. Chickens are laying good, and I managed to hunt a deer, smoked the meat for winter." "You've been busy," Clara observed. "Thank you," he shrugged. "It needed doing." After a moment, he added more quietly, "Place feels empty without you both." The simple admission warmed her. "We've missed you too." At the stable, Emily's delight at seeing Penny distracted them both. The child fed the gentle mare an apple Colton had brought, chattering happily about her stay in town and all the interesting things she'd seen. As they walked back to the boarding house, Emily between them holding both their hands, Clara was struck by how natural it felt, like a family. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. That evening, after Emily was asleep, Colton joined Clara on the boarding house's back porch. The night was cool but not cold, the stars brilliant in the clear mountain air. "Mother says Emily should be strong enough to travel by the end of the week," he said, leaning against the porch railing. Clara nodded. "The doctor agrees. She's recovering faster than expected." "Good. The garden's just about done, but there's still winter preparations to make. Firewood to cut, the root cellar to stock." He trailed off, looking out at the darkness. "Clara, we need to talk about what happens next," her heart quickened. "Yes, I suppose we do. The agreement we made was through harvest. That's nearly done." He turned to face her. "But I don't want to leave, not unless you want me to." Clara took a deep breath. "I don't want you to leave either." Relief washed over his features. "I'm glad, because I've been thinking about what the Reverend said about appearances and propriety. He wasn't entirely wrong." "No," she agreed. "People talk, they always will. Let them talk about something worth talking about then." Colton stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Clara." Though she'd half expected the proposal after her conversation with Catherine, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Colton." "I know it's sudden," he continued, "and maybe not very romantic, but I care for you, Clara, more than I thought possible after everything I've seen and done. You and Emily, you've become my home." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. "Are you sure?" "Taking on another man's child, a homestead that's barely surviving. I've never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. "I love you, Clara Campbell, and I love that little girl in there like she was my own." "I love you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I have for a while now." Colton's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He drew her into his arms, his kiss gentle but full of promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "Yes," Clara laughed, "though there's something you should know. The day before you arrived, I was at my lowest point. Emily asked why we were alone when other families had fathers, and I told her." She swallowed hard. "I said no one wants a woman with a child." Colton's expression softened. "Well, I do. I want both of you more than anything." They were married 2 days later in the small Presbyterian church, with Catherine and Emily as their witnesses. Reverend Porter, perhaps relieved to have the situation resolved so respectably, performed the ceremony with unexpected warmth. Emily stood proudly beside her mother, beaming as Colton promised to care for both of them for the rest of his life. "You're my papa now," she asked afterward, looking up at him with serious eyes. Colton knelt to her level. "If you'll have me, yes. Though I'll never try to replace your father who's gone, you can keep him in your heart while still letting me in too." Emily considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I think I'd like having a papa again, especially you." The journey back to the homestead was filled with talk of the future improvements they wanted to make, crops they might try next season, even the possibility of expanding their house when funds allowed. As the familiar cabin came into view, Clara felt a surge of gratitude. What had once seemed like a burden, this remote piece of land had become the foundation of a new beginning. That night, after Emily was asleep in her small room, Clara and Colton sat on their porch watching the stars, his arm around her shoulders. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Clara smiled, leaning into his embrace. "It's good to be home, all of us together." As winter settled over the Arizona territory, the Thornton homestead thrived under the care of its expanded family. The cabin was snug and warm, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Emily blossomed under Colton's gentle guidance, learning to ride her own pony by spring and helping with chores suited to her age. When the school board approached Clara about teaching in Loveland's expanded schoolhouse, Colton supported her immediately. "You'd be wasting your gifts not to teach," he told her. "We'll make it work," and they did. Clara taught 3 days a week in town, staying at Catherine's boarding house on teaching nights and returning home for the remainder of the week. Emily attended school with her, thriving in the classroom environment. As their first anniversary approached, Colton finished the addition to their cabin he'd been working on through the winter, a proper bedroom for Emily, and a small study where Clara could prepare her lessons. The homestead claim was secured, the garden expanded, and a small herd of cattle grazed on their land. Not bad for a year's work, Colton observed as they sat on their expanded porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Clara squeezed his hand. Not bad at all. Mama, Papa, Emily called, running from the chicken coop with excitement. The speckled hen has babies, come see. As they followed their daughter to admire the new chicks, Clara thought of the desperate woman she'd been a year ago, convinced that no one would want her with a child. How wrong she had been. In Colton, she'd found not just a husband but a partner, a friend, a father for her daughter. In choosing love over convention, she'd found the home she'd always sought, and as Colton caught her eye over Emily's excited chatter, his smile told her he'd found the same. 6 months later, when Clara shared the news that their family would be expanding again, his joy was boundless. "A brother or sister for Emily," he said, holding Clara close. "Our family growing stronger." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied, kissing her softly. "You were worth waiting for, Clara Thornton. You and Emily both." When their son was born the following summer, a sturdy boy they named Thomas after Colton's father, the circle felt complete. The homestead flourished, becoming known throughout the county for its fine crops and warm hospitality. Clara continued teaching, eventually becoming headmistress of Loveland's growing school, while Colton expanded their cattle operation into a respectable ranch. Emily grew into a confident young woman with her mother's intelligence and her stepfather's steadfast nature, treasuring both the memory of the father she'd barely known and the love of the man who'd chosen to be her papa. Years later, when visitors asked how the successful Thornton family had gotten its start, Clara would smile at her husband and reply simply, with a brave question and a braver answer. "I once said no one wants a woman with a child. He proved me wonderfully wrong."